Good day, ladies, gentlemen, ne'er-do-wells, and anyone else who had time to break from work and watch this podcast when they should be doing other things. I see you. It's Rick. We're back with the Sound Horizons podcast, brought to you by TuneTrack. And today's guest is an exceptional human being. He's a drummer. He's an engineer. He's a drum tech. Ooh, there's one you didn't think I was going to throw in there. You thought I was just going to go down the typical rigmarole of this guy, that guy. No, drum tech. We're going to talk about drum stuff today. If you're not a drummer, you're going to learn something. If you are a drummer, yeah, no hope for you now. So you might as well just stick with it. Let's talk about it while we're here. I'd like you to put your greasy internet hands and keyboards together for your friend and mine, Mr. Marc MACNAB-JACK. Dun, 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 dun. Welcome.
Yes, rockers. Hello, mate. How you doing?
It doesn't matter. And I say this all the time to everyone I'm talking to. There is no good transition or intro that is not just hokey. Like, if we were sitting in a room together on a couch, it would be even more awkward because I'd like stand up and you'd walk out like talk show style from behind a curtain and people would clap and it's just weird. I feel like all of these should actually start as just a fade in, like mid conversation. Like you and I have already been talking for an hour. We pick it up and then it just fades out. But alas,
well, Well, maybe we should do the European and just, digitally kiss each other on the chin. That'd be a nice way to begin. Yeah.
I think we'll get flagged by HR if we do that. I think me being an American, I think that would cause a protest or some sort of diversity and equity training seminar. Mr. MACNAB-JACK, you are coming to us live from across the pond today. Can you please enlighten everyone to where your lovely location is?
Well, I am in my studio, Misper Studios, and I'm literally in the centre of Bath, in England, in the southwest of England, right in the centre of Bath. So, and my studio is part of a building called the Forum, which is an Art Deco cinema, and this is the old projection room. So there used to be. This is where the projection room was and where the projector was.
Wow. Cool. Okay, so wait a minute. So, okay, I want to come back to Misfit Studios because I think that's a big piece of this puzzle, but I want to talk about, you wear so many hats. I alluded to it when we talked. So I want to talk about drummer Marc. Let's talk to drummer Marc for a second. So you're in a band, a pretty kick-ass band, Band of Skulls. Talk to me about that. How long have you been doing that and where did that start for you?
Well, I guess I've been sort of playing with the guys for about 5-6 years now. But I guess it as all these stories begin, it begins with your own band, right? You go out and you play gigs. And my band, which was a band called Kill It Kid at the time, was touring, and we were kind of a similar band to Band of Skulls, so we'd float around each other all the time. So we knew each other. And then when my band sort of stopped touring and Band of Skulls drummer decided to move on, I got the call, and it was the sort of perfect timing and the perfect sort of role for me because it's very much hit hard and like have fun. It's very rock and roll. It's very real. It's very off the cuff, and it's a lot of fun.
So is there a very vibrant music scene there in Bath then where you're at? I mean, is it kind of, does everyone know everyone, or is it a little bit traditional in another way?
Yeah, it's it definitely does have a music scene. I mean, the southwest of England at the moment is a real pull for musicians. I mean, it's no Nashville or anything, but it kind of has a lot of touring people here. It's got a load of studios, kind of similar to mine. And obviously, there's like the big studios like Peter Gabriel's place, and there is definitely a scene here. There's some local bands here, like The Heavy, who have that song "How'd You Like Me Now," like. They're from here and they're good friends of ours. So I think what happens here is if a band does do well, everyone kind of gets together because we're kind of small but mighty, you know.
Sure.
So there's definitely that sense of unity and family in it for sure.
So you're a drummer and you're doing the drum thing, fine. So drum tech though, that's a whole and studio owner. So those two are a little bit more cohesively linked together. Talk to me. and we're going to drive this one into the ground. The drum tech thing, I think, is going to be interesting to a lot of people because depending on who you talk to in what phase of their career, drum tech can mean a number of different things. So for you, when you tout your services as a drum tech, what generally are you known for? What is it that you like to do as far as the tech world is concerned in drums?
Well, it's interesting. It's sort of something I stumbled into. And I think after playing, I mean, I started touring when I was 17 years old, and I'm 37 now. And, so I've done 20 years of touring, and the majority of that as a player. But I guess the drum teching start of it started when I was like 2 years old, because my dad was a touring drummer. So, I would go with him to all his shows and go on tour with him. And sometimes he'd be playing a cool venue, and sometimes he'd be playing kind of a strip club, and I'd be there, so I kind of had this real thing with drums of like setting them up and fascinated with the sound of them and all that sort of stuff. Ever since I was really, really little, it was like something that I was just around and interested in. And I was always super geeky about gear, which, I think some players just want to play. And I'm definitely like that, but I also want to know the nuances of why drums do what they do. So I think that intrigue led to when I eventually got asked to actually tech for someone. It kind of came out of a curiosity of like, this could be really fun. Like, to me, it was mad that I got paid without having to play them. Like the stress of actually doing the gig. And I loved it. So that happened kind of when I had a daughter about 6 years ago. And by the nature of having kids, you want to fill your diary up, and an opportunity came to tech. I was like, sure, I'll go do that. And I'd had tech for me as well. But it was always the same thing, that I was always more interested in what the tech was doing than he was in me. Or like, so I'd learned from those guys. And then when it came to actually doing a gig, and I think one of my first teching gigs was Wembley Stadium with a band called Years and Years. So it sort of just went straight away. And I just loved it. I was working with this girl called Paris, she's an amazing drummer. Just awesome. And Years and Years are like a big pop act, and a lot of their set is kind of all electronic. So I got brought in to kind of design this full hybrid system with like a full like acoustic kit. I don't know. I just I fell in love with the job. And I think for me, it's about trying to get the musician or the drummer just to flow in their playing. And I get great satisfaction when you've done your job right and you see them flow and you see them play. It's like, that's where the satisfaction comes for me within it. And I love it. It's awesome.
Do you have a preference, or even more, not preference, but like, do you like one over the other, live teching versus studio teching? They're two totally different worlds.
Yeah, I guess the live teching came out of the fact that I run a studio, and people tend to come to me to record drums. And so when these bigger pop productions were going out, they needed someone to understand the kind of audio side of it, as well as just the general drum teching side of it. So I think, I don't know, it's just one and the same for me. I tell you what it is like, I made a decision a while back. I was just like, you know what? Drums are my thing.
Sure.
And however I can make money out of them, I'm going to do it.
A wise man.
Yeah. And I love it. And I'm all in on drums.
Okay, well, let's talk about drums. I sound like, have you seen that movie, What About Bob, with Dr. Leo Marvin? No, let's talk about weird. No. So let's, when it comes to drums, okay, you love drums. You've worked with a number of different drummers, obviously different brands, different kits. Do you have favorite drum sets or favorite eras of physical drums, that have been manufactured? Are you 70s guy, 90s guy, modern stuff? Is there anything that really does it for you consistently when it comes to gear, drum wise?
Well, yeah, I tend to really enjoy vintage gear.
Okay.
Partly just for my own playing style. Like the music I love is that era, the 70s stuff and the 60s stuff. So there's a romance to those drums, right?
Sure.
But then in a working context, especially on tour, like, give me new drums because they don't break.
Yeah. I was gonna
and
say
they hold their tuning, and
those 60s drums are great until they get under the lights and they're up on stage for more than 5 seconds. Yeah. Or the hardware snaps.
It's super cute until you're on your 50th show.
Okay. So this is also, okay, so you're a drum tech. So now you're hypercritical. You have this alert sensibility about drums. And a drummer comes into your studio and is recording. Do you force your drum wisdom on him, or do you let people just come in and just, okay, this is what I'm going to do, whether you dig it or not, drum god? Is that, or can you sit by and listen to a bad drum sound, or do you have to get involved?
Well, I think they're two separate questions. One is, no, I don't. I never want to enforce my thing on someone else, because I think that's, especially as a tech, a tech producer or engineer. Like, I think my philosophy is always just bring out the best in who they are. I think that's the most fun way to do it. I mean, I've for years I've worked with different producers, big producers and small producers. And I think the thing that I took away more than anything was those who just wanted you to flourish for being you. They encouraged your playing and your sound, because no one's ever done it. It's unique to you. So I think that's what's exciting for me in the studio and on the road, is just to draw out the best of who they are. Now naturally, yes. I mean, I'll give you an example of where I caveat this, because we did I worked with this guy called James Arthur, and he did Middlesbrough Stadium like a couple of weeks ago, and it's his hometown show, it's his home football stadium, and he went to a battle of the bands the night before, and whoever won got to open up the stadium, like a local band.
Okay.
And so this young band who've basically never done a gig before, like, thrusted onto a stadium stage and playing, and this kid like turns up with some drums, and like, he's obviously like taking them out of his garage or whatever, but I couldn't resist tuning them. I had to go over and pull them out. It's just like,
I see.
Yeah.
I see how it is.
But more just so he can have fun.
Of course. It's always about the drummer having fun. I couldn't. So you, as a tech and as a player, so tons of live venues, tons of studios. How does this influence the design of your studio? And where in the process did your studio happen? So how long have you had Mitzvah Studios?
Mitzvah has been around for, it's about 7-8 years now.
Okay. So on the journey, how many of those other things influenced your decisions? Talk to me about that, because I see we're going to get to what I see in the background. It's a beautiful backdrop. Obviously there's a lot of drums there, but I'm curious.
It was all natural. I didn't stage it at all, I promise.
No, of course. So you're playing all these shows, you're teching, you're working in studios, and then you're like, well, I'm gonna do my own studio. What are you drawing from there? Where's that influence now? What do you want?
That's I think it's a great question. I mean, everyone's got their own way of doing things and their own flow. So I think for the first few years, it was just trying to figure out who I am within this space and in recording space, and how I like to work. But I definitely took a lot from, the years of making records, and I mean, we made a record at Oceanway, we'd recorded at Abbey Road, we recorded at all these big studios. And I think there's an essence to those studios that have magic, and it's not about the gear, and it's not about the acoustics. It's about the feeling of sense of home when you're in it. So that first and foremost was kind of my thing. I wanted guys and girls to come in and just feel comfortable to create and feel like this is their home for the day or for a week or however long. And I sought advice from all these guys who we'd work with in these giant studios, like, I've got this amount of money, what do I do? And they were just like, don't just start really small, like start with one bit of gear and just get to know that bit of gear and understand it thoroughly, and then just piece it together. Don't try and get loads of gear and have no idea how to use it. Just slowly build. And I think that's how it's been for me, starting with a really simple preamp and then slowly growing and grow your mic collection and that sort of stuff. But there was definitely things that I noticed gear-wise within those studios that for my drumming, they'd seem to always use Coles mics, for instance, as overheads. They never really used Neumann's or anything like that. And so there was certain things that I definitely wanted, because I knew that kind of captured my sound the best. But it's a slow process,
Well, sure.
Things are expensive.
Well, they're expensive. And then to your point, I mean, recording the drums is an endless, timeless, I mean, you start when you're, like you said, 17. When you're 77, you still won't have found the sound yet. You'll have gone
No.
through all the drum sets, all the microphones, all this. I mean, it's a rabbit hole and then some. I'm curious. You had mentioned that you're in this historic building, which is cool. How does the
Yeah.
building's actual physical architecture kind of inform the sound? Is it a live room? Is there a lot of bleed between the walls? You mentioned that there's other people in the building as well. What is the nature of the building kind of do influence wise?
Well, I think, commercial spaces now, it's just so hard to have because it's so expensive and it's so hard for studios to survive. So you end up adapting to squeezing yourself into other spaces because it's more affordable and that sort of thing. So there's a little bit of that here, but I'm very much separate to the rest of the building. But that back wall there is an 1,800 seat of auditorium. I don't remember, like a few months ago, like Saxon were in there, like sound checking.
Nice.
And I was trying to do this like really quiet acoustic guitar, and I was like, you know what? I think we should just go to dinner and come back tomorrow.
Wow. So there's
Saxon, like, wow.
So you just kind of you work with it, right? I mean, you do what you
exactly.
can when you can do it. But I would think Saxon's not there every week or every night, so you've got some time.
No, exactly.
So I know I can hear the collective twitching in everyone's head about all the gear behind you. So before I get to addressing that, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Okay, I'm a producer. Cool. Let's pretend. It's just pretend. I call you and I say, "Hey, I'm coming into the studio. I hear you're the best of the best and handsome to boot. So I want both of those things. I need you to give me just a standard rock and roll. I don't have any gear. Just bring whatever kit you think is going to be a good standard rock and roll drum sound. What would you bring?
Drums wise?
Yeah, drums wise.
That's a really good question. I mean, I'd probably, I've got a Ludwig mahogany behind me. Probably bring that. It's like 24 by 14 kick drum. Okay, so you guys do it the other way. You do 14 by 24. So I'll try and do it the American way. But
don't try and rope me into this American. Don't you do it. Don't you put me at the heart of the American drum size controversy. Don't you do it. Now you'll start bringing up the date and how we do the date wrong and the metric system. I had nothing to do with any of this. But you are correct. 24 inches in diameter would be where you'd go with a 14-inch depth. Yes.
Always, man. Yeah. Like I played 24s because I was always in rock and roll bands, like 24s, the Bonham thing, I wasn't quite man enough for a 26. So 24 was one. And then 13, 16, 18. It's got to be done.
Okay, and what heads are you going to
mahogany? Mahogany. You got to put mahogany.
And what heads are you going to put on this kit?
Oh, this is going to be controversial in many ways.
Here we go.
People. Because there's this whole thing with, I'm going to put it out there. Remo are great. Evans are great. Everyone's great. They're all really good. But I don't know. There's something about Evans heads that I really enjoy. The Evans UV2s are the ones I'm going to at the moment because they have this is a bit nerdy, but they have they're clear. Mm-hmm. There's basically like a clear head around the bearing edge, and then the inner circle is coated. So you kind of get the attack and brightness from the bearing edge from the clear, but you get the warmth of a coated. But it kind of feels like it plays like a clear, so you can it's quite fast. But you got that warmth from the coated part of it.
Are you porting the kick drum head, or are you leaving it full on a 24?
Yeah, I'm definitely porting it.
Yeah. What are you putting in there, if anything?
Well, yeah, I mean that kind of depends. Probably I try and keep it as minimal as possible.
Sure.
Just like two rolled up towels on either side of the skins.
Yeah.
Batter head and resonant head. Yeah, you gotta for rock and roll stuff, you've got to let that thing, because especially like a band like Band of Skulls. Like typically it was just bass, guitar, and vocal and drums fill this huge space. So the drums themselves have a lot of like sonic to fill.
Sure.
So I feel like that if you're working in like a more of a pop atmosphere where you got loads of playback and all this, you need something more tight and precise so it punches through. But definitely for rock and roll, you can afford to have those kick drums, your snares, and your toms as open as possible. Well, resonance is your friend in that situation.
I notice in your size selection, so the 24 by 14, I love,
Yeah.
because the 14 gives you that attack that you would lose if you go with a 20 or a 22. But there was a time, if you remember in the 90s, when every drummer's like, I want a 20 by 22. And I was like, you guys are idiots. But so I'm a big fan of 14-inch, traditional size 14 or 16-inch kick drums. But you went with bigger toms.
Yeah.
13, okay, cool. So more resonant, more volume. I get it. So what's the coup de grace? What's the snare drum that comes with we're going for that standard rock kit?
Oh,
You can only choose one and you can't bring a backup. What's that snare drum?
Oh, it's so difficult.
I know.
I'm looking. I have a shelf there full of snare drums, and I'm looking at the 402 and the Black Beauty.
Don't choose the Black Beauty. Bring the 402.
Yeah. Do you know what though? This is interesting. In any session that I did in these studios, I always asked for a Black Beauty, and we'd hire in a Black Beauty,
Of course.
and I'd always end up using a 402. Always.
Of course.
So I think a 402.
The 402 is the unsung hero. Now I'm not. Look, to your point, nothing against Black Beauties, and I don't think I don't think any music listening audience even realizes how many Black Beauty snare drums they've been exposed to through recorded music over the years. I think they have no idea. Like it's it's the one. That's the drum. But the 402 is got that. So what head are we putting on the 402? What head and what depth is your 402?
Yeah, it's 14 by 6.5.
6.5. Okay.
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm using an Evans HD Dry.
Okay.
Got these little portholes on it on the
Mhm.
top, and when you hit it, it kind of like it really hits you in the face. But again, it's like it's not super present, so it has this like natural dampening with it because of the holes. So you get this loudness with it, but also like a bit of control. So that's what I'm using at the moment. But it does change, you know. But yeah, that one's good.
So when you get a call along lines with all this gear, okay, so I'm not done. You're not off the hook yet with the gear. We're going in. So
it's just, I love like there's other drums there. I'm like, oh, I just betrayed the Heyman in the 70s.
And that was the point. I want you to walk away from this entire thing feeling horrible about your life decisions.
Oh no.
No. So you get a call from a producer, someone you've worked with or haven't worked with, irregardless, but you know where they're going to work. I just said irregardless, which is a huge pet peeve of the internet, by the way. I'm not even going to look. I know. I'm not even going to look at the camera, but I'm going to bring it up again several more times in this whole podcast just to aggravate. I just want to drill down how little concern I have for anybody's grammatical objections. Anyway, get the call from the producer and they tell you what studio they're going to work in. You've worked there before. In your mind, if you know where you're going to record, does that influence the gear selection you're going to bring with, regardless of the music, or is it always the music that informs? Or is it a little bit from column A, column B?
Wow, it's a good, yeah. It's kind of, in a studio setting, it's more about the player than anything else. Like who's playing them. If it's me playing them, yeah, I'll just go to what I want to play and what I think works for the music and not worry about the room. But that changes in a live context. It does definitely change in live, because I think what works in a studio, especially sizes wise with kits and skins, is very different in a live context. So yeah, that's my sort of halfway of answering your.
Sure, but that's
answering your question.
So are you a proponent of bigger drums live or smaller drums live? Physical dimensions.
I think actually in the studio, smaller drums, especially smaller kit drums, can actually have more power and have more punch.
Absolutely.
Especially for heavy rock stuff or garage rock stuff, you know. And I think that's the common misconception is like, you know, I've got this bigger drum. I think you have a bigger drum because you like the tone of it, not necessarily that you like the punch of it. If you want like a really thuddy kick sound, then you know, a 20 or 22 is actually going to sound bigger than a 24 or 26.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to create something that has a kind of a certain tone to it, that vintage kind of rock thing, then a 24 is going to do it. But live, the reason why I started playing 24s is I'm quite a big guy, and live I used to look at pictures and I just used to look like this giant thing over the drums. So I just started getting bigger, and obviously Bonham played like big drums as well. And there was something about the way they played that it forced you to like work a certain way and feel a certain way. Like it made you work for it, you know?
Yeah.
Because I feel like fusion kicks, you can sort of be here, whereas like bigger drums make you sort of hang loose, you know?
So when you were building the studio, you had mentioned you got
Yeah.
advice on how to put the gear together. Did you have your own roadmap for how to acquire the drums or what drums to acquire to put you in this kind of position where you can do all? I mean, I'm presuming a lot, but I'm presuming as a tech that also for you means having drums available in the studio for people to use if they don't have them, or rent them, or backline, that sort of stuff. So as you're assembling your drum library of, how are you choosing which kits and what, in kind of walk us maybe just a little bit through like maybe some of your prized possessions there.
Yeah. So, I mean, all these kits basically are kits that I got for certain tours that I was drumming on for different people.
Okay.
Because the different people that I played for sort of had different sounds. So I would get an appropriate kit for that tour. Because if you're touring for like a year or a year and a half with someone, it's like you could kind of like, let me just get what's right for the show. Like this one here, is that the green one? I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
That's the only one that I actually bought for the studio. That's a vintage Heyman. It's 1970s.
Oh.
And it's British made. It's really cool. The Vibrasonics, they're kind of like the unsung heroes of English drum building. That I had a 63 Ludwig, like the proper Beatles Ludwig in the studio. And like people would come and, play it. But then my friend was selling it for this kit for like 300-400 quid. And this is the thing about these drums. Like a lot of people don't know about them. So you can pick them up at a really good price, but they play so much better than, well, this kit specifically plays so much better than my like 63 Ludwig. So I got rid of the Ludwig and just used this Heyman's. And in the studio, that's like the kit that I will go to most of the time for studio stuff. But then like this kit here, the brown one.
Yeah.
That I got because I was touring with a band called Bombay Bicycle Club, who in the UK, they're pretty big here. They'll do like borderline arenas, so like big theatres and arenas. But the tour that I bought that for was doing an arena tour. And I was with a guy called Sivu, and we were like the main support for the tour. And again, this is a Hammer EMI kit, a British kit when EMI Records were making drums randomly. Wow. And I picked it up. And again, it's one of those things, if you know about drums, like I saw it online for 150 quid. And I was like, no way, that's a Hammer EMI. Some guy didn't know what he had. It had this horrible yellow wrap on it, which I took off and then stained it and then took it on this arena tour. And I remember it was quite funny because people come up and go, oh, I love your drums. Like, what is it? I was like, oh yeah, this is really posh vintage thing. Yeah, it's really cool. It was 150 quid. But it sounds incredible. Like, yeah.
Wow. So when you get an older kit, you had mentioned you replaced the wrap. Where does your competency level? Like, are you recutting edges? Are you sanding things down? Are you doing any of the real grunt work, redrilling holes, putting in new hardware? Or are you ultimately just finishing the drums up and cleaning them up to keep them in there?
Yeah. That's kind of it. Like there's a guy down the road from us called Dramatic, a guy called Tristan, he's a great drum builder. And if you need bearing edges cut and stuff, like he's the guy. So he's a good friend of mine as well. And if I need anything like that, he's better to do it than me taking a risk on it. So I send it to him. But then Smart. Like so that's those two. But then there's like this kit. Oh, which way is it? This way. That one there. But that was built for me by a company called RD in Minneapolis. That's probably the only kit that I have like sentimental value for. It was like it was the third record of my band. We used that kit for like the whole campaign. It's really cool. Wow. And then there's a CNC kit, a Ludwig kit, and then loads of other stuff. There's a Gretsch kit there as well.
I was just about to ask if you had the magic G word kit, and you said Gretsch. So now all the other drummers can breathe a sigh of, okay, he's got a Gretsch kit. He's legit.
Yeah, but that's the one I don't ever use.
Of course not. No.
Yeah. It's great. It's just, I don't know. It's not as exciting, but
so
no harm. I like Gretsch, but yeah.
Obviously, you're intimate with all these instruments, and you know their tonal variants and differences. And so not in your studio, but out of any other work you're doing in someone else's studio, which one of those drum sets do you think has been recorded the most?
Oh, that's a good question. The Heyman, for sure, the green one. Yeah, yeah.
And because of that's vintage, is that limited as far as, like, you have the sizes you have, and that's pretty much it?
Yeah, it's 12, 13, 16, and a 22. Um,
Nice.
yeah, it's cool. It's amazing, and it lived a life before I had it as well. Yeah, the guy who had it, I think he toured with it as well, and that sort of stuff. But that's the only one. That's the only kit. I drummed for a guy called Alberta Cross, and the band Alberta Cross, and um, yeah, I sometimes use that live, but it generally just stays in the studio. But
Mm.
then this CNC kit, the black kit, I often use that for live stuff if it's not like a big rock thing. There's a girl called Liz Lawrence over here who's like a kind of like indie pop electro. I use that. I got that kit for her whole campaign because
Oh, wow.
it needs that tighter, more condensed sound. Yeah.
So, okay, you're sitting at home, you're just hanging out, having a great day. You get 3 phone calls in a row. Studio work to go tech for someone, live gig to go play live or do a small tour, studio work at your studio recording a band. All 3
Mm,
pay the same amount of money and all
yeah.
3 will take the same amount of time. Which one do you choose and why? Show your work.
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, Band of Skulls Band of Skulls and Alberta Cross are kind of my two main projects that sort of when everything else goes away, that's the constant. And the music that I love the most. So anything to do with those guys is kind of like my priority. Yeah,
Nice.
Band of Skulls and Alberta Cross. And I've got that situation at the moment. Like James Arthur's out. I was just done a week, but this week I'm sort of in with. I've got stuff in here with Alberta Cross and Band of Skulls. They're both making records at the same time, so
Wow.
I've had to come off the road in order to create space to be able to be available to them.
That's a good problem to
So yeah,
have, though. That's a beautiful thing. That's a
yeah,
great, great, great problem.
it's tricky because like the main guy that I tech for is a guy called Dan Bingham, who is a phenomenal drummer, but he's also a ridiculous piano player. He's just a virtuoso. And I was brought in to work with him because he's the MD for James. And James is like one of the biggest streamed artists of all times. Like he's giant. And Dan, I think Dan loves the way I tech because I think part of it is the fact that I think like a player. I'm still a player, so I think that he's got that sort of level of respect for me. And even on the James gig, he plays keys for like a bunch of songs, and he'll have me play drums during the gig. So there's kind of this understanding with him that he respects. He likes the way I tech because I play, and I think there's that kind of mutual agreement that he understands that I need to be able to go off and do my playing stuff.
Sure.
But it's one of them where it's like it's a hard balance to not make sure people don't feel like I'm screwing them over or letting them
Of
down or
course.
anything. So it's a difficult one. But I think good relationships with people, long-standing relationships with people, and loyalty. Like if you show enough loyalty to them and you give enough, I think there should be the grace without taking the mick, obviously, for them to allow you to do what you need to do. And because I do think part of what your value isn't just the one thing; it's everything that you bring to a gig,
Of
whether
course.
it's the studio or playing. So yeah,
So
it's tricky.
when you're in a situation, and I keep coming back to the studio just because things seem to be a little more acute in the studio, and something's not working. The drums are up, they're tuned, they're great, everything sounds great, but the producer turns and goes, "I don't know, something's just not right about the drum sound." What's your
Mm.
first? What's your go to in your mind? Where do you start to try and assess that problem or meet that challenge?
Well, actually, the studio is much easier than live because it's very rare that happens in the studio for me. Because I think because the live setting, you're moving into different. A stadium show is so different to an arena show, which is so different to like a big theater show. So, and you have to tune the drums according to the resonant frequencies of those rooms. And you have to work with the front of house engineer to dial in those unsympathetic resonance frequencies of the building to the resonant frequencies of the drums. You're trying to match that the whole time. And in studio environments, generally speaking, they're treated room where there's like positive resonance. So
Yeah.
it's all pretty sympathetic. So generally speaking, it's more of an issue live, I think. It's live where you really have to stay on your toes, especially with like if you when there's occasions where you go into a stadium, for instance, and the way like a floor tom responds to subs in a stadium is so different to like to a theater or something, and especially for
Sure.
the player, because a theater, for instance, you're getting a lot back from the room or the space, whereas like arenas and stadiums, you get nothing back. So therefore, like the tuning of the drums within your ears, within your in ears, has to be like so dialed to that specific moment. That's where the challenge more lies. Whereas studio stuff is kind of like, you know, the only thing you really need to watch out for in the studios is phase. You know, phase relationships obviously between mics, but often like the phase relationships between two skins, you know, your batter head and your resonant heads, when those aren't working together and sound out of phase, sometimes the engineer or producer will be like, oh, it sounds a bit out of phase, and it could be actually the drum. Whereas in a live context, you very rarely have major phase problems. Yeah.
So when you talk about the live scenario, and you're working for the room, you're working for everything else, how many of the people that you work with or for as a tech are using electronics to augment that live sound? Or even a lot of people just use the electronics in their monitor so that they get a clear in-ear sound. Would you say that that's incredibly common, not so common? Does it depend on the music? And how about you with Band of Skulls? Are you using anything like that?
No, Band of Skulls is just straight up rock and roll. I think it's,
Sure.
yeah, it's like, you know, bombastic and hit hard and hope for the best kind of, you know, let it hang loose, let it be a
Nice.
bit ragged and, you know, round the edge, you know, like that's cool. I don't know, I mean, like years and years, for instance, definitely relies on electronics, but more as a creative choice, because the
Sure.
record sounds like that and the acoustic drums just don't do that. Whereas other gigs, I tend to try and move drummers away from using electronics live in a way, because especially on like kick drums with triggers and snare drums, because that is a massive problem with phase. You know, often those kick sounds and your natural kick sounds just sound out of phase. So my thing with it has always been like, let's just get a really good drum sound from the drums so that we don't have to use anything supplemented. Unless it's like a really creative choice. But as a default, I try to avoid them, to be honest. Rely on the tuning and the playing.
Do you ever have an artist or a client where it's like, no, I got to have this, and it's just got to be, I'm used to this, it's got to be this? I mean, do you ever have that fight? You don't have to mention names, obviously, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, not really, because I mean, if they're passionate about something, I'll just let them have it. You know, what's the point in fighting? You know, like
Smart man.
Sort of, yeah,
Nice.
I mean, have what you want, dude. Like,
yeah,
and that's sometimes a lot of the time with drum sound, especially, you know, in context, is like, even if to me it's wrong, if they're happy, then it's right. You know, it's that. And I tend to lean the biggest challenge with teching is you've got the monitor engineer, the front of house engineer, the drummer, and yourself with opinions of how it should be. So my job as the tech is to sort of mitigate those problems up front, to try and manage that so that everyone's kind of happy, you know. So my process is dial the drums to myself, put my in-ears in, then work with the monitor engineer and dial them into my ears. And then I'll go out front, the drummer comes up, gets settled, I'll go out front and talk to the front of house engineer and just listen to what's happening, see if he's happening, if he or she wants any changes, and then go back and just do it again, you know, just double check things. So then every day it's like dialed as optimum as it possibly could be to the space.
So are there certain pieces of gear, equipment in the live setting where you show up to a gig and you see that the gear is there and you're like, ah, shit, that's going to break. And like you, where, you know, I mean, like this isn't going to make it through 3 days. This, and where you're like, well, we should probably get 6 of those. And I mean, are there, without indemnifying anyone, are there the usual suspects where you see something and you're like, well, we might want to address that before it's an issue?
It's vintage snare drums.
Yeah. Of course.
It's always, people always want to use the special vintage snare. It's really cool. It's this, that, and the other. And you're like, you're going to smack the shit out of that for about 100 days this year.
The snare's going to crack off. The beds are going to go. It's going to, yeah.
And it's
so,
like,
I mean,
oh, can you?
Is there? No. That to me is the fascinating. Now, obviously, different players play different ways, and there's different, but generally speaking, the road is brutal on every piece of gear it meets, and drums are,
including the drummer.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So when you look at thrones and pedals and I mean, is there anything where you're like, this is or conversely, is there anything you were like, oh, that's going to be fun. That's, if I could choose the gear to go out for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, that would be the one I would take.
Yeah. I mean, like, I actually don't use DW hardware on any gig that we use, but like wherever there's DW hardware, it's going to stand the test of time. And same with Tama. Some of the Road Pro stuff's like really good, but it's generally hardware that I look at that I'm like, that needs to be solid. Because drums are built to be hit, aren't they? You know, so it's just, as long as the hardware can support everything, it's fine. But yeah, my main worry is vintage stuff, vintage gear, because it's just, one, I don't want to break it, and over just working on it. I've had situations with like a vintage snare where I needed to put new snares on it, but the butt where the snare's like attached to, I was like, oh, that looks like it needs tightening up. I was like, let me just take it all off and then refix it, and then realize like everything about it was just pitted and gone. Oh. And the thing that was holding it together was the rust.
Of course.
Like, oh man. So yeah, that's the first thing that I'll try and like, can we just get new snare drums? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Like we're playing stadiums and arenas, like let's just get new drums. Yeah.
So when you're doing a bigger room, let's call it a theater, arena, or stadium, are you changing the heads every day for the artist, or are you going 1 or 2 shows? How many shows before you're swapping heads out at that level?
Yeah, that depends on the skin, really. I try and pick the right skin for the player, so that you're not like having to like go through, skins every night. One, it's not good for the environment. It's financially not very good. So partnering the right skin to the right player is the first thing. That's something that I try and do. But yeah, so try and every 3 shows really. I try and do that, and then snare drums every second show usually.
So
but it depends. If you're in a really hot place, then the skin's good.
Yeah. That's probably the best impression of what the skin does that I think I've ever seen. Do you tune by ear, or are you using a drum dial or an app, or are you both? Is it how are you approaching it? And then are you doing it the same live as in the studio, or do you tune differently, your own method?
Yeah, just by ear really. Like that's the one thing you can't teach. Like I go into universities and do like drum sound courses, and teach guys from shell to microphone, like everything about drums. And I remember my first drum tech was in Seattle. We're making a record at Bear Creek Studios, and the drum tech, I think he'd like worked with Pearl Jam and stuff, like a real legendary guitar tech and drum tech, sorry.
Yeah.
And he just got a kit. I was like, what do you want? I was like, I'll just make it like big and bombastic, bro. Like I didn't really know what I was doing. I was like 20 years old or something, 19, 20, flown out to America, like get me a DW kit, like I want to be big and
yes.
And he goes to the kit and he just like says, and he barely hit the drums. I was like, dude, like he was like, yeah, sit down, see how you feel. I was like, yeah, but you need to tune them. He goes, oh, it's tuned. And I was like, all right. So I hit him. I was like, oh my goodness, like how did you do that? I was like, you didn't even hit the drums, and he just said, he was like, the sounds and the tension of the fingers. I was like, I've got no idea what that means, but I want some of it.
Yeah. Sir, I don't know what you're currently smoking or selling on the side, but I would like to buy all of it. No, and again, to your point.
He's right. That's why I've learned. You can kind of feel.
Well, to that avail,
when something's in.
Let me ask you the $60,000 question, because sound is subjective. We'll all agree, and everybody's different. Is there any such thing as a bad drum sound?
Ooh.
And now look. Now, so let me preface.
Okay.
Let me preface. So, right, obviously, when most people create music, they come from a place of reference. Like, we have a sound or this sound, and certainly one could argue within the context of that reference, that may not be the right drum sound. But my question is there a bad drum sound?
Well, what's interesting is I have a story about this, because I drummed for a band in the UK for like a year, who are a very famous band, and like quite like, you know, they had a huge song in that, like they're a big band, and their drummer left. And I'll be just discreet because
Of
I don't
course.
want to be rude.
We appreciate
And
that.
an amazing drummer, and actually a hero of mine. And I sat at his kit, and which he tuned, and like I hit it. I was like, that sounds mental. Like I was like, is that how it is? Yeah. They were like, yeah, that's how it is. And I was like, okay, fine, like whatever. And then I heard him play it, and it sounded amazing. So
Sure.
it was this really valuable lesson of like, there is such thing as a bad drum sound, but there's not necessarily a bad drummer on that sound, you know, like someone hitting it. And I've had this situation where, you know, you get the kit sounding absolutely amazing, and then the player comes and sits at it, and they hit off center on every drum, and it just sounds terrible. Then you have to relearn how to like tune the drum to be slightly wonky, you know. But yeah, of course. I mean, some drums just sound absolute balls.
Yeah. Well, and again, so to me, it's always been a fascinating question, because my approach to music has always been contextual, right? So it's the drum sound for, like we talked about Tommy Lee, the drum sound for Dr. Feelgood wouldn't probably sound good in a Mariah Carey song. Maybe it would. My point is that the music ultimately dictates the confines of what we consider to be good or appropriate. But when all you do is work with drums, and we here at Tune Track know a little bit about drums, it can be maddening when you really start to think about, you know, you're 3 hours into the session, you've tuned the drums, you know, they sound, and you just think to yourself, well, they sound like drums. You know, you lose that spark for a second, like, it's made a noise, it's loud, it's round, it's right there, that's what it does. And someone says, you know, someone looks at you and goes, how does that sound? And you're like, it sounds like a drum. It sounds exactly, when I look at it, it sounds like what it looks like, a drum. Yeah, it does it. Yeah. And do you ever find yourself in any of these situations, because you've worn all of the hats, right? You're the tech, you're the player, you're the producer, where you're just like, and I mean this with all sincerity, you're all like, you know, that's good enough. That is good enough for that. That's what we need, is just enough. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be horrible. That's good enough.
No, and you know, the biggest thing about the studio, you know, and building a studio was, I never want the instruments to get in the way of the creativity. And I think that's the big mistake young people make coming up, is like they get so into the gear and the stuff that they forget that it's like about creativity, and it's about playing, and it's about just like, it doesn't matter what you're playing, just get up and play it. And I kind of come from that like old rock and roll thing with my dad, where it's like, you go and play like some shitty club, you know, where there's a magician on, and then there's a stripper, and then there's a comedian, and it's Salford Working Men's Club, you know. I remember those days, you know, like being back there and being in the dressing rooms, and you got the magician coming off, you know, pulling everything out of his sleeves, and then you've got
amazing.
You've got the stripper sort of getting undressed to go and get dressed to go and do her thing, and then my dad's the band playing, and there's something so great about that, of like, just get up and do your thing, you know. And I'm kind of like that with drums, like, don't just never ever let the gear get in the way or make an excuse for bad creativity. I think that's the point. Like, a great drummer in a really shitty room with one mic is going to sound amazing. Loads of great mics in a really great room, and a really bad drummer is still going to sound bad. Yeah.
Well, and when that's, you know, to your point, everybody wants to bring lots of drums and lots of mics until they have to load it in their car and carry it somewhere. Then everyone is like, I think vintage drums, 4 pieces, that's the way to go from here on out. It's So
totally.
let's, as we wind this kind of back around to the studio now. So let's talk about the studio. You talked about how obviously you love gear, but gear is not the focal point of anything you're trying to do. You're trying to capture the essence and the vibe, which is fantastic. Have you found over the years, to you personally as a producer, that you have a preference in drum, like preamps or a mixing console, or a, you know, that sort of post microphone sound? What's the next stop for you? Are you an API guy, SSL, Neve? What do you think all drums sound good through?
Yeah, I've got you know, I've got a rack of Neves, and for me that's where I sort of begin, you know, especially for like room sounds and overheads. I kind of get my sound through the Coles, and I've got this like 60s U89 Neumann, and I put them through the Neve channels, and I kind of get my sound there, then use the close mics just to bolster stuff. Again, it's that kind of like rock and roll thing and old school thing of just trying to capture an energy in a room. You know, we just did this amazing thing with Alberta Cross with a girl called Katie Melua, who's she's like a big singer here, and it was kind of a studio down the road, and we all got in the same room, like just the 4 mics set up on drums, like 2 ribbons and kick and snare, and then everyone playing in the room, kind of, you know, playing to the room, playing to the mics in the room. And I got the mixes back today, and it just sounds amazing. You know, like you have to kind of, it forces you to play a certain way in the moment. And I love that. And I think there's something really, really cool about that. I think it's great to have options, but it's even better to commit to sound up front and to make that decision, being like, this is what we're going with, and we're not going to change it. You know,
That's fantastic.
if I could record to tape, I would, because I love that it forces you to make decisions, and then you make the whole record and the whole song around that one decision and around that one sound, instead of like, yeah, let's put those up and we'll make the decision later. You know, I'm sort of the other way around.
So I want to talk, the last 2 things I want to talk about are my 2 least favorite things relative to the drum conversation, which is cymbals and compression. So let's talk about those 2 shitty things real quick. So let's talk about cymbals, because we haven't really addressed cymbals. And obviously, again, we know there's no right or wrong answers here, but we talk about rock and roll. We've talked about a lot of vintage and classic rock, and traditionally speaking, because of the way music was originally performed, the big band era, jazz bands, that cymbals were always, drums and cymbals were big. Drums conventionally and cymbals conversely got smaller, but cymbals seemed to get smaller before drums did. And now you've got all types of different sounds and sizes of cymbals. For you, based on, let's talk about Band of Skulls. Are you a big, like 15-inch hi-hats and 24-inch ride, or are you a traditional 14-20 kind of guy?
I'm 16-inch hi-hats.
What? That's the size of a crash cymbal. That's insane.
Well, yeah. 16-inch hi-hats, and then like 22-inch, like kind of dark ride, crash ride, and then a 22-inch crash, and then 20-inch and 20-inch. Istanbuls. And the reason why I liked Istanbuls was because I could smack the shit out of them, and they weren't too bright. They were kind of dark. You know, I could kind of, I'm naturally, like, when I do my hands like this on a table, it just sounds loud. It's like, and I want my cymbals to take that but not hurt everybody, you know. So I've been with Istanbul for like, I don't know, 15 years or something.
You would make the best librarian in the world. Everyone's trying to be quiet, and you're just dropping books and just setting your coffee down and disrupting the entire place. That would be my favorite. We know what your next career stop. Studio's sold. I'm a librarian now.
You just described my schooling. I had this amazing conversation and on tour last week, and we were flying on this charter, right? And everyone there is like, we're going from gig to gig, and like, we're on this plane, we've got our own plane, which is all very la-di-da and whatever. And then it dawned on us, someone said, at school, I just wanted to make the teachers cry, and like, I just didn't want to be there and just hellraise. And I was like, yeah, I was a bit like that. And then the whole plane was just like, yeah, me too. And it was this realization that someone said to me once, like, what is it like being on tour? Like, what are the people like? And I was like, imagine all the dysfunctional ADHD, fun, loud, rambunctious kids, and then put them on a tour bus and send them on tour, and throw in like the creative, weird guys as well. That's kind of it.
The worst classroom ever.
Unteachable.
But so you have it's interesting that you have such big hats, but you have a 22-inch size ride. Is that a conscious decision, or was that just kind of what you're used to where it landed? Have you ever tried 24s or 26-inch rides, or is it a physical thing? A lot of guys don't go big because of the position, and they don't want it to,
No, I've sort of been thinking about doing that recently, actually. But yeah, I kind of wanted to be as ergonomical as possible without feeling weird. And that's kind of, I did have a 24 one, and I didn't quite like how it sat. Like, I had to have the stand quite far away, and it just felt a bit weird to me. But I went bigger because I loved the feeling of laying into them, and I felt like they could take it, and that's bigger was better for me. More is more.
So conversely, well, more is more. So conversely, if someone shows up to the studio to record drums when you're there recording, they didn't bring any cymbals. Again, your standard rock pop gig. What are you going to suggest they play? The Istanbuls, or are you going to throw something different up? That's maybe a little more.
Yeah. So I did a single for this band called Little Thief a few months ago, and this girl drummer Reef, she's badass. She's amazing, but she hits so hard, and she hits cymbals so hard. And so I set her up, and then I got all of my broken Istanbul cymbals, and I put them as far away from the drums as she could physically like be able to play them properly. And she played them, and we recorded it, and the single came out. It got onto Radio 1. It was playlisted and did really well, and it sounds amazing. But I think because I worked with her before, she would come in and she had pasty cymbals that are super bright and loud.
Yeah.
And I could never get the drums to sit right. It was kind of one of those things where I was like, oh, do we do drums first and then do the cymbals over? But she's such a like flow player where she does stuff in the moment that I didn't want to stifle her playing. So yeah, her broken cymbals and as far away from the drums as possible. And she was kind of like this, you know.
It's pretty awesome.
It sounded epic. Yeah,
so
it was cool.
For you just touched on something. Is there a definite, and a lot of people hear it, I hear it, but I'm curious to how you process it. When you see an artist set up, a drummer set up, and they're playing, do you assess in real time if the drum and cymbal marriage is proper or not? Because that is to your point, a highly huge, overlooked aspect under the microphone.
Oh, it's massive.
I mean, massive. It can change everything. Yeah. And are you acutely aware of that? And have you always been aware of that? Or did one day were you just like, oh, wait a minute, I should probably pay some more attention to this marriage here?
It became because I used to like my cymbals to be really low, like kind of right next to the drums and super low. So big drums and then big low cymbals. And I just frustrated engineers because they couldn't get the mix right, because I'd be hitting the cymbals so hard that the drum, I was always frustrated with how they sounded. And then I just learned to hit better and learn how to like placing cymbals in the right space in order to allow tom mics to actually have their moment and not be overtaken. And I changed when I started recording other drummers, was like, oh man, like it's so much in where the cymbals are placed and how they sound is defining the whole drum kit. So it came from me realizing my own mistakes, really, and my own,
which is nice. It's a nice advantage to have. Very nice advantage to have. Wow. Okay.
I basically had to learn to be a studio drummer, not a live drummer. And it was that I learned to place cymbals in the right place and hit them properly.
Do you feel that's another great point? So the difference between being a studio and a live drummer, and I'm just presenting opinion, not musical fact. Relax, everyone. But there was a time when there seemed to be a much greater divide between drummers that earned their career and kind of their keep playing in the studio, and every once in a while maybe they'd go on tour if the situation was right, and then drummers that were the guys that got called to play. Well, these are the live guys. Do you find that those roles, because of the industry kind of downsizing, are those roles a little bit more, you have to be both? Or do you still know, or are you aware of guys that just do live or just do session work conversely?
Yeah, it's definitely still there, the divide, I think. But I just think there's a demand on a live player that's just different to a studio player. You know, there's the way you look is a big factor. The way you perform, the pressure of playing live is different to the pressure in the studio. And I think it just suits certain personalities. But I do think that the shift in the career aspect of drumming has changed. And I think it's become a lot more like diverse. Like, you know, I'm a good example of like a player by trade, but how do I make a living and survive? And it's like, well, let me do all these things and I can, you know, provide for my family. And I think most drummers now, even right at the top, and are like, they want to just make a solid living. And if that's in the studio, great. And if that's live, great. But I think there are certain guys that are just suited to the studio playing wise, and who they are and their character is suited to the studio, because touring isn't for everyone.
No, nor should it be. Nor should it be.
No, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I know some absolutely amazing musicians who are some of the best musicians I know, are just not built for the road, and that's fine. And I think the studio is a really good place to let that creativity out. Yeah, because forcing yourself to tour when you don't want to is brutal. You know, you got to really want to be there.
Well, and to your point, it in my mind anyway, it defeats the purpose of why you joined a band and didn't get a straight job anyway. If now you're forced to be out on the road because you absolutely have no choice, you'd be better off going and bagging groceries and at least sleeping in your own bed every night. So
totally, yeah.
So now we come to that dreaded drummer, the divide, the compression. Let's talk about it. Let's get into it. So you're a studio owner, you record drums. Are you compressing on the way in? And if you are, what are you compressing?
I'm not. I'm just looking at my compressors.
Yeah,
you said that. It's odd. If I'm producing it, then yes.
Okay.
But if I'm like for James Arthur, for instance, we recorded drums in here for a bunch of his songs, and the guy who's producing it is in LA, and it's like, in that context, I'll let them make the creative choices and let them have the option of what they want to do and what they don't want to do.
Sure.
But if I'm producing, I can make those decisions. Then yeah, absolutely, commit.
So are you compressing everything? Kick, snare, rooms, overheads, or do you have a system? You don't have to give all your secrets away. I'm just curious. Some drummer producers go compressor crazy, and then some drummer producers just put you'd barely even know it was there. It's a touch on the room and that's their thing. Where do you fall in the great debate?
I kind of with kick and snare, I'll do a little bit on the way in. I've got like vintage DBX 160s which I'll use on the kick and snare. And then I've got these dynamite compressors, the Valley People ones, which I really love on toms, but also like really squashy overheads. So I'll do that, but it'll be definitely like an artistic choice opposed to just like, this is my default thing that I'm going to do. But yeah, but generally, yeah, a little bit on kick and snare and something on the overheads I'll do.
I was just going to ask, so you compress the coals. Okay. So you do compress the coals a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, but generally speaking, when guys come to me, they're wanting like a big rock and roll sound, something that sounds kind of bombastic and a bit like distorted and stuff. So I'll go in, like I love to have like an auxiliary mic, and then like I've got a vibro champ, a blackface vibro champ, and I'll put that in the other room and like mic that up and have like delay and spring stuff coming off it, and that'll use that, and then use like a stereo pair for reverb and create, because I've got quite a small space. In order to make it sound big, I kind of use amps and stuff to create big reverb sounds and stuff like that, and commit that way to the sound, instead of being like, right, I'm going to use a Valhalla at the end of it. Like, let's see what we can do in the room so it feels more analog and it feels more live,
Well, and to your point, and you've committed, you've got it. You've got the actual air moving the microphone. It's there. It's whether you use it or not, it's irrelevant. You've got it, and that moment will never happen again. You captured it.
Yeah. That's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're a Renaissance man. I want to go down. I want you to know how cool you are, as I once a drummer, father, which is got to be huge. So what are you going to, by the way, what are you going to do when she comes to you at 18? She's like, hey, I'm going to be a drummer in a rock band. See you later, Dad. That's your fault. Okay, all right. Nice.
Yeah. No, totally. I've got, so Joni is 6 and then Evangeline is 4. And Joni's learning to play piano, but they're like, they've been on tour already, they've been out with Band of Skulls, and like we did Wembley like a couple of months ago with James. So they came to see me play at Wembley. But it's the thing that's hilarious for me is like, obviously I grew up with my dad, but it was like playing, but it was like a bit different, it wasn't like, he did really big stuff. Don't get me wrong. He drummed for a band called The Bachelors, who had 17 number ones or something ridiculous. Like,
wow.
He kind of did it, but he'd also play like the shitty clubs, and that's what I remember, like going to in his Ford Capri car with the drums loaded in the back, him smoking Marlboro Lights and listening to Bon Jovi. That's kind of that's my idea of being a kid on tour. But
that was my drive to work today. That was
like, but my kids, it's like they came to Wembley and their first thing, oh cool, where's the sweets, like they're so They've
They're
become
not
so
impressed.
normalized by
They
it.
don't care. They're like,
They
oh,
don't
my
give a
dad's a
shit,
rock
mate.
star. They don't care about any of it. It's the best. They
It's
are
great.
not impressed. It keeps you
And they
humble.
call it like, we have like the band girls come in and stay, and it's like they refer to my touring folk as like my rocker mates, daddy's rocker mates. It's like, oh, are you with your rocker mates? Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. So
That's
yeah, that's how they
amazing.
define it. You're either a rocker or you're not, mate.
It's so good. There's nothing more brutal than a little girl. Just remember that. So you want honesty. You've got it twice now. But you're
100%.
a dad. You're a drummer. You're a drum tech. You're a gentleman. You're a studio owner, producer, mix engineer. So as you kind of move forward, you've got all these kind of things. You mentioned again. You just love drums. This all starts and ends with the fact that you love drums. What's next? And I don't mean like in some weird, like epic, you're going to write a book or write a movie, but is it just for you, is another day being able to do this good enough? Or is there a big plan? Is there a grand plan?
Yeah, I need to learn to read before I write a book.
You are a drummer. You are a drummer. That's true.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, one, I'm just super like I'm living my dream, and I'm super grateful to be here. And I'm always amazed where drums takes me. Like I think that's the thing. Is as someone said to me recently, like, what made you decide to be a musician? It's just like, oh, I didn't have a choice. It was just like I was all in from a really young age, and I think I'm just going to see how far it can go. But I'm excited. We've got Band of Skulls. We're working on a new record at the moment, and Alberta Cross are working on a new record. So I'm excited to see what the future holds for those guys. Band of Skulls have been one of those bands that have sort of really hit the top, and they're going into their second part of their career. And I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with that. And yeah, I definitely want to spend more time in the studio. I think that's like, I'd love to work on records, just kind of co-producing the drums on things and being alongside the producer and engineers in those moments and helping records out. And I've started to do that. So yeah, they're the two things I'm really excited about. But I love the road, man. Yeah. I can't, as much as I like. So yeah, one day I'll come off the road. It's like, no, I'm there for life. I think.
But that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing that you can do it. And again, to your point, not only from such a young age and have experienced it as a bystander with your dad, which is one component of it, but doing it as a player, then doing it as a support tech, and the fact that after all of those experiences, you still love it. Like you said, I don't think that was your choice. I think that's you. That's who you are. And I think it's cool that you get to lean into that. But now I'm going to ask you the last question. This is the hard question. You don't get to give me any bullshit answers either. You're going to give me a real answer. We're going to have three things, okay? You're walking down the street right now.
Oh, God.
To the studio, and the building is on fire. You can run into your studio space and only save 3 very specific things, and a drum set is not one thing. 3 things you can save. 3. What are the 3 you're taking out to save from the fire?
Well, I would number one, I'd get my 402 because my granddad was my father figure. I love my dad. Me and him are really good, great dude.
Of course,
I thank him for a lot. But my brother, my granddad, who was a deep sea fisherman, trawlerman, when he passed, he left me a tiny bit of money, and I bought that snare drum, and that's probably the only drum that's got like major value.
Okay, so the 402 is coming with us. That's going out. We've saved it. Now we've got 2 more pieces of gear we can save. What are they?
Well, I don't know how much. My Slingland Radio King, the 1950s Radio King. I'd grab that.
Okay.
And I'd probably grab this vintage Ampeg because it's not mine. I need to give it back.
You don't want to get sued, so you're like, no, I got to give this back. Oh, that's the best. That might be the best answer ever. The one of attrition, like, crap, this isn't mine. I got to take this. I guess I have to do the right thing. Stupid fire. Well, let's pray to all the gods that never happens, and that you just continue to accumulate more gear and more drums. Dude, I have to tell you, we talk to a lot of people on this podcast, and you're one of them. But your journey is pretty spectacular, and I mean that in the most sincere way. Not that everybody's own journey isn't awesome. It is, but when you get to talk to someone who clearly loves what they do, there's something that you really take into account there. And you clearly love what you do. And I think that everybody watching, that's the takeaway. If I was going to say, for all the things you are, I think we're all going to remember you as the one dude who's having the best day every day because he's living the dream. Not that everybody else isn't, especially you down there in front. Maybe you're not, though. I'm just saying, it's just you're a consummate joy, and it's no secret after getting to spend some time with you why people keep calling you back to do anything.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
So
yeah, man, you gotta love it.
We are wishing you all the best in everything. I mean, obviously we love you. If there's anything we can do for you, just let us know so that we can let you down easy, because it's just not going to happen. But just kidding. But until we see you again, and hopefully we will, we'll be checking out Band of Skulls. Is there anything else you want to point us in the direction of? Obviously, your website, not website, your Instagram page, your studio is an Instagram page, correct?
Yeah,
we're going to link it all down below. Okay.
Yeah, my Instagram's kind of like where I house everything. But yeah, man. Yeah, Band of Skulls, Alberta Cross have got stuff coming out. We're touring. We've got new music. Yeah, super excited about all that.
My friends, thank you for your time.
Yes, rockers.
Okay, people of the interweb, there you go. Another amazingly interesting human being with a way cooler job and occupation than you. And I hope you spend some time thinking about all of the poor decisions you've made today that led you away from your hopes and your dreams. And as you clock out of whatever computer you clock out of or work from home at, I hope you cry yourself to sleep tonight knowing you could have had what he had, but opted to just go the other way. No, just kidding. This isn't a call from your parents. It's Rick from the Sound Horizons podcast. We are kidding. We all know you're awesome, but thank you for tuning in again this week. Hey, if you're not doing anything next week, same time, same bat channel, we'll be here talking to another amazing human person. I'm not really sure who or what, but we're going to do it, and you can watch if you want to. We know you're into that kind of thing. Until then, I'm Rick from the Sound Horizons podcast, brought to you by TuneTrack. And thank you for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, guys.